Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Edward Elric character review. Another brand new unit added to Global this week as part of the Full Metal Alchemist collaboration. The presentation this week, pretty standard with one small asterisk in the middle here. We do the character overview, the base and total stat analysis, a couple other metrics that kind of feed into the report card where I grade those stats in the context of the game. Some thoughts about the kit in that final grade as well, which then segues to the class and job overview where we go through some of those more in depth. I want to take just a little time here to talk about his sub-job ability, his TP-based ability, and I'm going to do a separate presentation on this. I don't want it to get lost in this presentation, but I have a little bit to speak to you about that at length. Then go into just the TMR review, my general thoughts kind of encapsulating everything we know at that point, and then touching upon the job-based division card eligibility, which there is a bunch, the Espers synergies and weapon optimization as well. So kicking things off, brand new wind unit that Global gave to us for free. We do have to obviously accumulate the resources to still max him, but they've given him the unique main job of the Full Metal Alchemist with the Spellblade and Strider sub-jobs as well. He does equip fists with cloths, hats, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 90 cost unit. Now in terms of weapon type resistances, the two strongest are slash and pierce, and you'll see that's a common trend in his kit. That's really his niche in terms of most survivability. 5% to missile, neutral to strike, and the minus 5% to magic, which is kind of interesting. You'll see why when we talk about his survivability in a few moments here. Now, I don't think he's a 97 faith unit, partly because of that innate little magic weakness, if you will. So keeping him at 50 faith, you don't have to worry terribly about these status ailments, but immobilize and disable are two decent ones that we are seeing a big uptick in. 10% berserk certainly as well really seems primed to go toe-to-toe with what we're seeing for some of the fire meta, or what they do for status ailments. But as we go into the base stat overview, so as a physical damage dealer, he actually skews relatively high on the HP side of things. That's definitely far above average in terms of what normal damage dealers get for base HP. From an attack perspective, definitely a tier down from many other units, but they do make up for that on his board, which you'll see in just a moment here. But based attack, not crazy high, but certainly going to benefit from things that scale off of it. The agility, he comes in at 58. That's honestly not that bad at all. He does have an agility passive to make that even better. He definitely gets up above average speed there. Dexterity, kind of right in the middle there for base dexterity, nothing too crazy, and actually skews relatively high on the luck side, which I thought was very intriguing. You don't often get to see that, particularly for characters who are not evade units, and Ed really isn't one of them. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Now for a total stat, as we transition those charts to this one, kind of seeing his relative strength, real no weaknesses here. As we mentioned, stands out from the HP and luck perspective. When we add the board nodes, the mastery, things of that nature, a couple things change here. The attack most noticeably, and that's because of what they give him for his mastery ability. He does get relatively faster from an agility perspective, and then kind of back to normal on the HP side of things. But in total, his mastery, which we'll see later, is 25% attack, which does give him about 100 extra attack. That's definitely a little unique compared to what most damage dealers get. But overall, no real weaknesses here from a total stat perspective. Now, in terms of agility, this blue line is agility with no passives equipped. He comes in at 80, which is a little bit above the UR average. He does have a passive to increase it further, which does keep him above average in terms of what you can achieve for agility level. So that is obviously a really great thing to see. And again, this is assuming 15% and 8% main and sub-vision card slots. Now from a crit, hit, and crit avoid, they don't give him a ton of critical hit rate on the board notes, so he does end up kind of right here in the middle, and although we saw he has that little lower total dexterity, those crit notes kind of get him back to this average point, and that above average luck also translates to above average critical avoidance, but it's not necessarily a strength base, it's just slightly above average, so nothing wrong here either. Now from an accuracy perspective, this is one of his relative strengths. Again, this blue line is with no passives equipped compared to characters with no passives equipped. He does end up on the higher end in terms of total accuracy, and one of his passives that you'll likely have on most of the time is an accuracy passive, and it does put him a tier above many of the other units. He's not one of the most accurate characters in the game, but he is very competitive there by just a couple percentage points, so that is absolutely a relative strength of his. Now from an evade perspective, because of that luck, he does actually end up on this slope of units that do have some kind of evasion per se. He's not an evade unit and would need some external help. I'll talk about that in a moment, but like theoretically, maybe if you ran a strike team and pre and used the operative subjob to give them 25 evasion and you were maxing all of their luck, maybe they dodge some things in a non-evade meta. Very niche though. That's just the stress test of what is hypothetically possible, but not something you'll see quite often. So really not an evade unit from my opinion. Now for the report card overall, effective HP, I'm going with a B plus here for total effective HP. Definitely more physical than magical. B plus on the physical side, B minus on the magical side, which is kind of interesting here because he does come with 14 innate spirit, despite the fact that he has minus 5% magic resistance. You don't often see that. No defense in his kit though, no ways to boost it, but he does have access to protect, and because of that enormous slash and pierce resistance, it does kind of bump him up and obviously skew him toward those attack types. He does have 10 innate AoE resistance, another 15 on a buff as well, so you like to see that in some of your modern damage dealers. So he doesn't have as many survivability tools as some of the more current units, if you will, but his HP is good enough and he's well-rounded enough that he still ends up, in the broad scheme of the game, relatively high. Now, primary stat also going B+ here. Good attack potential. In terms of what you expect for damage output, he does have a strike in parallel on the main job, a defense break on the limit break, 40 defense pen on a passive with another 30 that you can get on a buff. So he's got some consistent damage output. I don't know if he's going to top the attack charts per se, but it is a very strong attack stat for a variety of reasons. Now, agility, I'm going B here. He's got 80, now again, assuming the vision cards, 80 agility on that UR average of 77, but when you do give him that passive, puts him at 86 compared to the average of 80. 86 is definitely on the speedier side of things for what many characters can achieve, so going with a solid B there. Now, accuracy, I'm going with a B+. Again, not amazing, but he is very competitive there. Will likely have that 25% accuracy passive on. He does have guaranteed it as well, and it's on one of his best abilities, so I don't think many people should be terribly worried about him potentially missing things, but you are obviously going to, against hyper evade, want to invest a little bit in that still, but definitely gets an advantage over other characters. Now, evasion, going with a C here, just mathematically speaking, theoretically there, would need that external help, as I mentioned, not an evade unit, but grade-wise, the percentage is there if you were to min-max it. And movement, I'm going with a B. Move +1 potential on his passive ability, so nice that he can potentially get that extra movement on the map. Now, on that topic of passives, overall passives, going with a B here. It's a little vanilla, but honestly not that bad. I actually really like the flexibility of his passives. I might be going a little low here on the grade, if only because I don't think they're like blow your mind amazing passives, but they're very good for letting him do what he wants to do in a variety of different builds. Counter abilities, I'm going with an A- here. I don't think any of them are off the charts incredible, but there's an immense amount of great versatility in different metas of what you might equip these counters for, so I like that very much. The overall kit also going A- here. The subjobs are fair. They actually offer maybe one or two things max to his overall kit, but the two things they do offer are very good, and the main job, in my opinion, operates very, very well. So overall, very strong in the main kit for a final grade of an A-. He's a character that does very well with the pending strike damage that's about to kind of come into the game here because of the vision cards. He also does very well with what Wind does in terms of mono element Wind, where he fits that profile with Resol and Flagbearer Glaciella as a very accurate unit, or potentially so. He's got some pierce and some slash in his kit as well, so overall, some really great synergies there. Now, we look at the passive abilities. The one that I think you're going to have on 100% of the time is Natural Instincts. That's the accuracy of 25, the defense pen of 40. And then after that, you really have your pick depending upon the meta of what you want to do. Metal Resolve is slash and pierce res of 12%, with HP of 12% as well. I do like this one a lot. I don't know if it's my favorite though. I think leg strength amplification might be, just because of that extra agility and the move of 1. That being said, Providence of Earth, the magic res of 12 is really kind of to hedge that negative magic weakness. So again, not the most amazing passive abilities, but they are all very good and have the time and place for a variety of different builds. Now, from the counter perspective, the unique counter they've given him is Equivalent Exchange. Now, this is, I think it's like a 4 or 5 range ability. I need to just double check that. I'm sorry. I believe it's 4 squares, but it's a 30% chance to proc against physical damage. It's strike damage, but it's a 100% hit chance. Now, I know most people think of Evasion and think of Elena, where that's magic scaling damage, so this will not proc in that case, but more and more now we are seeing those physical units really skewed toward being more the evasive units. So in an Evasion meta, this is an exceptionally good counter. That being said though, in non-Evasion metas, I think these other two are also very good. Again, having that little bit of magic weakness. Magic Guard is very good from the 20% chance to proc a 45% reduction in magic damage. That's a great way to mitigate it. And then just Danger Sense being well-rounded overall, that 20% chance, and it reduces all damage by 30%. So again, maybe not the most incredible counters in the world, but they are very valuable considering what build and what meta you might be in. Now, for the main job buffs, I'm still in the process of playing with his AI. I'm pretty positive that Blessing of the Truth is the priority here. It's the teammate buff that increases the AoE res of 15, while also increasing slash and pierce res by 25%. But Automail's Crux is really the shining star of the buffs here in the main job. And if you can't use this in battle, you have a problem. This should always be used at least once in the battle. This will essentially allow all of his attacks to be a dispel for everything. Dispel haste, dispel buffs, dispel all those things. But it also gives them Protect, 25% damage reduction for 3 turns, and AP Restoration of 5%. So if you can't get this off, it's a very different Edward Elric that you're talking about. Now, as we get into the main job offensive abilities, there's a lot of variety here in terms of how he can attack you. 3 strike attacks, 1 pierce, technically 2 unit resistance scaling attacks, and 2 AoE attacks. I'll talk about them more in depth in a second. But Full Metal Fist, I actually love these kinds of abilities on the low AP cost. It's a 25% strike imperil, which there aren't many of these in the game, so this is very nice for him to have to enable other strike units. The real shining star here, though, is Adamantine Pillar Transmutation. This is one of those abilities that you can stand in a rather large AoE. It will select 2 units nearby. It will attack their unit resistance, even though it's multiple targets. Will also increase his defense pen for 3 turns, in addition to the passive, and it's 100% hit chance, so there's a lot to really like there. One of the best abilities. Now, Spear Transmutation, kind of similar to Alphonse. I don't love this ability, if only because you're more than likely never going to use it. The strike damage will almost always do more damage than the pierce, in my opinion. It does have the highest modifier here at 200%, so you might get more usage out of it than anything, but I see this more as potential synergy with someone like Flagberry Glass Yellow, who she uses a triple hit ability, and if Ed can chain that as a 4th hit with Spear Transmutation, yeah, you're talking about some sizable damage there, but on its own, I don't think it's anything terribly impressive, but certainly nice to have. And then Wall Breaker is a very, very good ability. This has a range of 5 squares away. It's a nice big diamond AoE, breaks barrier for all those targets, increases the modifier if they have AP Restoration on as well. Overall, a lot of good things to like here. Now on the Subjob, and this is where I'm going to take a moment to talk about the Confine ability here a little more. Piercing Wind, I think it's a smidge redundant with the Piercing ability on the main job, so for that reason, I don't love this Subjob. I don't think Piercing Wind really adds anything that Pierce ability on the main job doesn't already. It's only 3 less AP, obviously a lot more limited for range, but I want to talk about Confine for a second here. Most jobs that we're seeing nowadays come in with this TP-oriented ability on these Subjobs, and the way this works in auto PvP is that characters that have offensive AI will always opt to do damage if they can. So the odds of them using Confine are relatively slim. Now, there are some opportunities where they won't opt for damage, and that's A, if the hit rate is 0% or single digit. And many of you might have seen that with your arithmeticians with AoE disable. That's essentially what's happening there. They'll often use AoE disable when the hit rate is 0 because it's a TP based ability. They don't have any buffs to cast on teammates. But Ed is not one of those characters. He will not be at 0%, so that's not one of those options. They will also opt to use this if A, when you run out of AP, if you can't get to an enemy to basic attack them to regenerate AP, they will use these abilities, so very valuable for that. And the thing you always have to juggle with these abilities is their range. What you don't want to happen is have an enemy walk into range and have one of your characters use this TP ability if it can reach further than their damaging ability, when they could be buffing instead. A great example of this is Disinformation on the operative job. The range of that is so large, it exceeds almost always any of their damage dealing attacks. And so if you have Disinformation enabled, they will use it because they can reach an enemy instead of buffing. So for that reason, you have to be really careful with the ranges here. Now, because this is a range of 5, if you go back just a slide here, Wall Breaker is technically his longest attack, also at 5, so it does not exceed that. And skipping ahead to the Limit Break, this is also 5 squares away. So from an AI perspective, he will always opt to use Limit Break before he ends up using Confine, and he will also opt to always use Wall Breaker before Confine. So number 1, that's great. In the instances, though, that he's out of AP, he can't get in range to basic attack because, again, if you move 3 squares, someone's still out of range. I actually really like this ability for what it does for the immobilize, the disable, and then the defense break of 30. And I'm thinking particularly for second Guild War fights, where once you've used that limit break on that first Guild War fight, for the second fight, you actually still have an opportunity to maybe get a defense break off here, with the status effects obviously as well. I'm not saying this is a great ability, and I'm not saying you should have it on all the time, but as far as TP abilities go for many of these characters, I normally wave them off because for those reasons that I mentioned of either outranging damage dealing abilities or maybe the ability's not that good. This is one though that's not the case though, and I actually think there is some auto PvP value here potentially, but it's obviously a question whether or not it outweighs the other sub jobs, and my answer is probably not, which leads us to the Spellblade. Now, of the Spellblade job, the only thing I like here is the magic barrier. I don't think anything else here will be a big source of damage for him. Resist magic as a buff has not been good in like 2 years. it just messes with AI too much and you want to use his main buffs as a priority. But the magic barrier here, 70% reduction is significant. For a magic weakness that he does have, this is a great buff. So I love the Spellblade for that niche and for that meta when you need to use that. Alternatively, Strider also, for the same reason of one ability here, Twisting Shield Breaker gives him another barrier break, but also Dispelling Courage. I don't really think anything here is exceptionally good in terms of what else he might use. Constricting Cleave can be good for PvE content because it's got that slow effect. And I think on average, he'll still opt for his strike damage abilities, but Twisting Shield Breaker here really is the shining star. So both these sub-jobs, again, rather limited, not necessarily amazing, but both those abilities are very good value adds for Ed overall. Now we get to the limit break. This is a doozy. 5 squares away, only 38 AP. It's the biggest defense in the break in the game at 45% defensive peril, 200% mod. This is an exceptionally good ability for him to follow up with damage, and honestly even makes the defense pen kind of irrelevant because many units don't even get above 45 defense, so this will put them either at 0 or close to it. Obviously, the more negative, the better. It will increase his damage significantly when that's done. But this is a superb limit break. Obviously, some great PvE potential as well for the biggest defense break you can give to your characters. Now, the mastery ability, nothing crazy here. That's that 25% attack. Pretty mundane, but it's nice that they give him that free, essentially 100 attack at all times. The dream ability, though, is where he gets that 10 AoE res, also 10% slash and pierce res. I do think this is valuable. Obviously, does some good things for the niche and survivability that he needs. Now, the TMR. I love this TMR. It's a cloth. It's got a slew of different stats on here. HP, defense, spirit, agility of 2, which is kind of cool. For agility tuning, you don't see that number very often. The accuracy of 8, but the ability is obviously very, very good here. 2 casts. It grants regen for yourself, only 10%, but healing power can increase that. And while the regen is in effect, you also get 25 unit resistance. So maybe not necessarily for Ed, but I do think it is great for Ed just because he has no self-heal mechanics. I think this is just an overall very valuable TMR for a variety of different people. So big thumbs up for that. Now my general thoughts overall, really well-rounded main kit as we saw. Protect and Dispel on one of those buffs. AoE, slash res, pierce res does have some good survivability for that niche and hard countering some of that. I'll talk more about slash res in a second though. He's got that select 2 100% hit with the 30 defense pen on it. That's a great ability. The diamond AoE barrier break and the 25% strike and peril on the lowest AP attack. Love all of that. Now, although limited, he does have good sub-job options for those small quality life bumps. The magic barrier on Spellblade, the courage move on Strider, those are obviously great value adds. Their survivability may be a little lacking compared to some more recent units, but in the teams you put him on, I don't think he's going to get blown out of the water. His HP is large enough that it probably can get replenished by external sources pretty easily. But the niche I want to talk about really quickly here is anti-slash and anti-pierce. More specifically, anti-pierce, because it's hard to be anti-slash nowadays. Sephiroth can maintain 100 slash res pen at near 100% of the time, so ignores all of it. And even Fire Vade right now, they have a lot of mechanics to penetrate through slash res, so this is diminished in value, but he's got 15% innately, and this is the same for both. 15% innately, 10% on Transcendence, 25% if you use the buff, 8% on his item, which we'll talk about in a second here, and 12% if you equip the passive. That's 70% pierce and slash res simultaneously at the same time. That's an exceptional amount of resistance for pierce in particular. He's going to take practically no damage from pierce units because of that. And although some of those meta slash damage dealers will cleave through much of that slash res, in the broad terms of the game, that is very, very strong to have at all times. We're not even talking about vision cards or espers, where you can likely get up to 100% here. Now, in terms of the weapon optimization, we'll talk about in a second, he may not even need to equip a weapon, quite honestly. I'll talk about that more in a few slides. And he does, as I mentioned, fit well both with strike teams and anti-evade wing teams. Resaw, Glaciella, Joom, all of them do great things for trying to counter that. Now, the job-based vision cards, talked about that with Alphonse. Ed is one of those units that also benefits. There's a huge swath of job-based vision cards here for Fist that make them a very complete team on their own. Both unit AoE res, 2 agility cards, 2 strike modifier cards. You got some missile and slash res, dexterity, crit rate, attack percent, literally everything you could possibly want. Ed will absolutely thrive with this. Now for the S percentages, I'm keeping this high level because as we all know, strike modifiers are basically non-existent on our Espers. So for Ed, you really want to focus for wind attack up and human killer. Now as far as wind attack up goes, there aren't a ton of wind-based physical Espers. Special shout out to Golden Armin, who is, I don't have his picture here, but Golden Armin is a very good Esper for him. But after that, obviously throw in a little bit of accuracy just to make sure that he can kind of stay competitive with that. And then after that, it's really bulk and matchup specific. So from that perspective, I'm going real basic here with Odin, Chaos Odin, and Dark Tetrasylphid. You know, Dark Tetrasylphid obviously has the wind attack, the accuracy, a whole bunch of other great mods, the human killer and whatnot. And then Dark Odin has the magic resistance, which is his weakness. So you can equip that to make that magic resistance positive. A lot of things to play with here, but I won't go terribly in depth outside of that. Now for the weapon optimization, I do think you can probably get away with equipping Ed's pocket watch, going with another piece of gear, and then an accessory as the TMR. I actually don't think you need a claw weapon here. And really you can get the source of attack stats from whatever trust stones you have on your TMR, if only because you get the wind attack 15 here. You can still get strike attack 10 on whatever trust stone passive that you want. But you have 3 great builds here between the aim, the shield, all the barrier. I've crafted one of each because I do think each of them does have a good time and place. Because I do think you're going to want this equipped at all times for Ed, just given the decreased AP consumption of 15%, very valuable, as well as the reaction block rate and that pierce and slash res. So if you have this on most of the time and you need that second, piece of equipment, things like pod, Alexandrite ring, bow tie if you want to make his move go back down to 3 if you have that passive on. Thornlit for the extra defense penetration as well as the agility down because he has that big AoE ability. There's a lot of flexibility there that I don't think you necessarily need the weapon, but should you need it. Gilded Devil is probably my least favorite of the 3. This is basically a copy-paste of Alphonse yesterday. This one's very basic in terms of what you have for a strike type damage. I think Tiger Fang is probably my second favorite here due to the 10 AoE resistance as well as the 171 magic. But optimally as well, I think this is still one of the better things as well with the lightweight steel fist TMR to get that accuracy of 20 on the box upgrade while still maintaining all of the attack stat on this item as well. And obviously when you use this, you can allow Ed to get more buffs off where you don't have to include the TMR buff and things. But that's the Ed Elric character review in a nutshell. Honestly, one of the best free units we've ever gotten. Gumi kind of continues to outdo themselves with how good these units are. Edward is for certain one of them. He's going to be a great staple for many win teams, which a lot of people have invested in. And is a very big part of that strike team that we see as well, where, yeah, Alphonse is a lightning unit, so if people are bringing King Bradley and Earth to the fight, Ed can kind of counteract that, being a wind unit to mitigate some of that, to make it a much tougher fight to win, pretty single-handedly. Access to those pierce and slash type attacks. There's a lot to really like here. So that's the review in a nutshell for now. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll talk to y'all soon.